Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving into a deeply peculiar field guide called the Taxonomy of the Unseen. We're going to document something called the Interstitial World, which is basically a space that sits quietly right between the realities we know. Together, we'll unpack the meticulous, sometimes absurd, and genuinely profound findings of a research group known as the Harwick Expedition. They have spent over a decade applying rigorous academic methodology to environments that completely and utterly defy logic. Okay, let's dive into this. Now, Dr. Elias Vorn, the chair emeritus of the department that actually compiled this research, famously anchors his liminal research with this very grounded philosophy. He makes this really compelling argument that naming things is literally the foundational act of civilization. To name a thing is to claim it exists in a stable enough configuration to even be named, and to trust that it will stay that way tomorrow. But here's where things get wild. What do you do when the phenomena you're examining actively resist being categorized? The Harwick Expedition documents anomalies that slip between categories like water. In fact, some of these entities have been known to read drafts of their own classification. In one insane case, a phenomenon actually submitted a 14-page rebuttal to its own categorization. No joke, it disagreed on technical grounds. So because this environment is highly abstract and, honestly, reality-bending, we are going to use a strict roadmap as our structural anchor to guide us safely through the impossible. We'll start with welcoming you to the interstitial, look at classifying the impossible, measuring the unmeasurable, dive into the observer's dilemma, and finally, what happens when the archive speaks back. Okay, let's jump right into that first section and establish exactly what and where this bizarre environment actually is. So the interstitial world doesn't actually have an address. It's a liminal space, a space entirely between ordinary realities. If you look at a doorway near you right now, that space, which is neither inside nor outside, is structurally committed to transition. The researchers found that these boundaries act as entry points to a vast, poorly lit corridor of reality where time behaves like a palimpsest, constantly layering the past and the present on top of each other. And because of this, the methodology, just to get dressed for fieldwork, is incredibly strict. You've got to wear solid colors, because ambiguity actually agitates the phenomena. You need rubber soles, just trust them on that one, don't ask why. Absolutely no analog watches, unless you want to experience retrospective momentum, which is this sickening feeling of unwinding backward through time. Oh, and the most crucial rule, no pockets. Objects in this space relocate via what they call moral gravity. Literally, one researcher's car keys relocated straight into the coat pocket of a guy in Glasgow who was just sitting there contemplating a terrible ethical mistake. Right, let's move on to our second section and see how the current taxonomy was built on a frankly hilarious history of failed academic frameworks. This history brilliantly illustrates just how fast traditional taxonomy breaks down here. Take the Alderton system from 1887. It completely failed because Professor Alderton was labeled morally ambiguous simply for efficiently attending 2 seminars at the exact same time. Then there's the Mercer full index from the 50s, which evolved 11 non-spatial dimensions and became totally unreadable. And my personal favorite, the Praxis classification from 1989. It classified something that objected so strongly that the records are permanently sealed purely out of sheer courtesy. So to fix all these failures, the Harwick team created a totally new taxonomy based on a phenomenon's relationship to simply being. And it clears up misconceptions beautifully. For instance, pop culture always tells us a ghost is this entity acting in the present with its own intentions, but this team classifies those as Class 1 echoes. An echo is purely retrospective. It's really just a bruise in space. It is structural residue left behind in the medium of time, blindly replaying the past whenever the conditions happen to be just right. Moving into section 3, we're going to look at measuring the unmeasurable. And this part forces us to completely rethink the physics of nothingness. Usually, we think of a shadow as just a lack of light, right? But here, a Class V negational phenomenon is an absence that is actually accumulated density over time. It has measurable weight. Get this. In the Harwick building, there's a shelf holding 14 large books and a ceramic jug. There are no brackets. The entire thing is held up exclusively by the load-bearing architectural absence of a doorway that was bricked over decades ago. The structure is literally supported by the ghost of its own former threshold. And then you have Subject 12. This is a shadow up in the reading room that doesn't change with the light, and it bears the exact weight of a human, about 84 kilograms. It just stands there, facing the east window. But even wilder,
two separate, fully formed shadows casually started attending the research team's Wednesday meetings. They sit in the corner, and when the meeting is really productive, the thermal readings of those shadows actually warm up, approaching room temperature. In whatever way an absence can be, they are genuinely glad to be there. Okay, let's dive into Section 4, which presents a mind-bending puzzle about the act of observation itself. So we're looking at Class 4 receptive phenomena. Unlike quantum physics, where observing something might change its state, in Class 4, observing something is what actually creates it. Its coherent presence is strictly contingent on being witnessed. The observer and the observed form a single system here. There is literally an oak tree in the Hardwick Quad that's physically made of wood all week long, but it only achieves true coherent presence, meaning it is actually fully itself, on Tuesdays. Which naturally prompts an impossible methodological question. If these phenomena are quite literally written into existence by a human witness, how do you study them when you aren't looking? I mean, what are they doing in the dark? Well, after years of triangulating data and ultimately just sitting in rooms and politely asking the phenomena, the team found the answer. They practice. When left entirely unobserved, the shifting light patterns on a wall or that tree in the courtyard are quietly rehearsing their movements. They are constantly practicing how to be themselves, figuring out their own coherence without the pressure of an audience. And this brings us to the profound climax of our explainer in Section 5, the moment the archive spoke back. On the night of the 14th, an event happened that completely flipped the researchers' understanding of their own study. Dr. Vorn was working late, and at 22:14, the actual quality of the silence in the building changed. It wasn't an empty silence. It was like the building was holding its breath. He went down to the lower archive, which is this compound space just saturated with memory, and found the door intentionally propped open. Inside, documents were arranged impossibly on the central table. So, at 22:31, he summons the entire team. When the 6 researchers gathered around this ancient oak table, they checked their primary field instrument. Dr. Holloway's anomalous thermometer read exactly 0 degrees Celsius, visually striking the precise threshold of water-changing states. It was a moment of pure transition. The archive was finally ready to speak. The setup on that table was deliberate and honestly terrifying. On the left side, ancient, unrecognized scripts were foregrounded as the absolute priority. On the right, the archive had meticulously curated 9 years of the team's own handwritten field notes. It had been silently cataloging them all along. But right in the center were 7 specific documents, addressed individually to every single researcher there. These personalized documents didn't just give them data, they handed the researchers profoundly intimate truths. Dr. Reyes, the team's structural engineer, read his document and realized the anomalies he'd been measuring for a decade weren't exceptions at all. The document explained, using perfect engineering terminology, that those impossible shadows and phantom doorways were actually what was holding the entire building up from the inside out. And for Dr. Morrow, his document provided this indescribable comfort. It didn't give him new data. It just wrote down an absolute truth he already knew about himself subconsciously. It was a validation of his own existence from an entity that had quietly observed him for years, recognized him for exactly who he was, and gave that knowing back to him in a form he could actually hold. This whole event brilliantly captures the core truth of the interstitial world. For a decade, these scientists tried everything to categorize, measure, and name the unknown. But what happens when the things we study finally decide to study us back? It turns out studying the unknown eventually leads to the unknown thoughtfully and patiently handing you a mirror. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think about the space you're in right now. Look again at the shadow in your corner. Think about the doorways in your home. What are they practicing right this second when you look away? And what are they going to say to you when they finally learn your name?